Thank you very much for your interest in this video. I shall be discussing illegal immigration and the EU. We start off with an outlook on the applicable legislative framework. Human rights are moral principles and norms protected by international law. Two of the requirements of human rights are empathy and the rule of law. They impose an obligation on persons to respect the human rights of others. It is universally accepted that human rights should not be taken away except as a result of due process based on specific circumstances. But what is due process? Due process is the legal requirement that the state must respect all legal rights that are owed to a person. Due process balances the power of law of the land and protects the individual person from it. When a government harms a person without following the exact course of the law, this constitutes a due process violation, which offends the rule of law. The purpose of the law is to create a balance. In this context, it is clear that while the individual must benefit from certain rights, regard must be had to the law of the land. Given that we are living in democratic and sovereign countries, the law includes the respect to the will of the people, hence what I call collective rights of the nation. Law cannot enforce itself, and the enforcement process entails an interest, specific quotations, and the interpretation of the right as written and as previously interpreted by superior courts. This explains why the balance has tipped in favor of the plea of illegal immigrants, given that the funding that goes towards those non-governmental organizations that accompany, serve and defend the rights of illegal immigrants, those that ensure access to human rights, those that promote integration and multiculturalism, those that provide aid to refugees, is always higher, much higher, than that allocated to national authorities to combat human trafficking. The balance between migrant rights and collective rights is totally off, but we shall see more about this later on. The main source of human rights are the two world wars. The Geneva Conventions safeguard the human rights of individuals involved in conflict, and despite first being framed before World War II, the conventions were revised as a result of World War II and re-adopted by the international community in 1949. This is how it started. Despite the adoption of these laws, which were mainly enacted with the aim of peacekeeping, the European Union established its own and separate legal order. In accordance with the first subparagraph of Article 6(1) Treaty on the European Union, the Charter is part of EU primary law and is, therefore, another source of EU law. Where the conditions for its application are fulfilled, the Member States are bound to comply with the Charter by reason of their accession to the EU. While nations are at liberty to withdraw from conventions, the simplest way for a member state to get rid of the unfair interpretation of European law by the European Court of Human Rights is therefore to leave the Union. The two people behind the Convention of Human Rights are Sir David Maxwell Fyfe, a British chief prosecutor in the Nuremberg trials, and Pierre-Henri Tietjen, a French resistance fighter and founding father of the European Court, who claimed that democracies do not become Nazi countries in one day. Evil progresses cunningly. One by one freedoms are suppressed. The common thing between them was their anti-Nazi sentiment. As a matter of fact, in 2009 The Guardian had reported that Sir David Morel Fyfe referred to Hermann Goering as Fat Boy and as a slap-happy Herman. This says a lot about the principle of impartiality during the Nuremberg trials. I cannot stop short from explaining that these trials, highly regarded by authors and historians, were termed as a flop by Judge Charles F. Wednestrom, an American lawyer who presided over and sharply criticized some of the Nuremberg war crime trials after World War II. He assailed what he saw as the biased approaches of some prosecutors to the trials, suggesting that they were more interested in furthering their own careers than in seeing justice done, and asserting that far too many of them were Jews and consequently of suspect loyalty to the United States. The whole atmosphere here is unwholesome. Lawyers, clerks, interpreters and researchers are employed who became Americans only in recent years, whose backgrounds were embedded in Europe's hatreds and prejudices. The trials were to have convinced the Germans of the guilt of their leaders, he said in 1948. They convinced the Germans merely that they lost the war to tough conquerors. He resigned from his appointment and flew home to America, leaving behind a statement to the Chicago Tribune which enumerated point by point his objections to the trials. Back to the legislative framework. While the link between human rights and human trafficking is rather clear, it does not necessarily follow that human rights will be at the center of responses to trafficking. The human rights-based approach places the victim at the center of any effective and credible action. It also extends the focus to the root causes that underlie trafficking, maintain impunity for traffickers, and deny justice to victims, such as patterns of discrimination, unjust distribution of power, demand for goods and services derived from exploitation, and complicity of the public sector. The European Union is very vocal and generous with human rights movements. The same dedication is not afforded to the other factor, which is that of seeking the underlying causes of human trafficking and bring traffickers to justice. The principle makes it clear that even those who are complicit should be arraigned. But this principle was not met with millions of euro in funds. The obligation of a state to investigate is highlighted by the Office of the High Commissioner of Human Rights, which defines human trafficking as: trafficking means much more than the organized movement of persons for profit. The critical additional factor that distinguishes trafficking from migrant smuggling is the presence of force, coercion and/or deception throughout or at some stage in the process, such deception, force or coercion being used for the purpose of exploitation. While the additional elements that distinguish trafficking from migrant smuggling may sometimes be obvious, in many cases they are difficult to prove without active investigation. A failure to identify a trafficked person correctly is likely to result in a further denial of that person's rights. States are therefore under an obligation to ensure that such identification can and does take place. It goes on. States have a responsibility under international law to act with due diligence to prevent trafficking, to investigate and prosecute traffickers and to assist and protect trafficked persons. 2. States shall exercise due diligence in identifying and eradicating public sector involvement or complicity in trafficking. All public officials suspected of being implicated in trafficking shall be investigated, tried and, if convicted, appropriately punished. 3. States shall effectively investigate, prosecute and adjudicate trafficking, including its component acts and related conduct, whether committed by governmental or by non-state actors. It also holds that a. States can repatriate people back to their country of origin. International and European law demands that trafficked persons can be returned with due regard for the safety of the person and for the status of any related legal proceedings. Art. 8.2. b. Repatriation to countries of destination shall preferably be voluntary. Art. 16.2. c. For trafficked persons who are not lawfully within the country, substantive and procedural guarantees against expulsion are much less clear, and states generally retain a considerable degree of discretion in deciding whether and when to remove unlawful immigrants. Trafficking is a crime as well as a violation of human rights. The criminalization of trafficking is an important step forward in ending impunity for traffickers. It is also an essential component of a comprehensive national and international response. States that fail to criminalize trafficking fully are failing in their obligation to protect victims of trafficking and to prevent future trafficking. They are also failing to provide the necessary structures within which state agencies can investigate, prosecute and adjudicate cases of trafficking in persons to the required standard of due diligence. Notwithstanding, most of the illegal immigrants that come to Europe pay for their voyage. They are given boats and GPS devices as well as instructions in order to call the closest ports and ask to be saved. Since there is an element of consent, one cannot consider these immigrants as victims of human trafficking. They fall under the category of smuggling. Smuggling is the facilitation of the illegal entry of people from one country into another, and it involves the migrant's consent. Most asylum seekers coming to Europe have been smuggled at certain points of their journey because they have no legal means of accessing safe territory. According to research, it costs between $300 and $2,000, depending on the circumstances, to make the journey from Libya to Europe by boat. International law defines smuggling of persons as procuring the illegal entry of a person into a country in order to obtain, directly or indirectly, a financial or other material benefit. In other words, smugglers help people cross borders undetected in exchange for payment. The rights of these immigrants are reduced since they have given their consent and cannot classify as victims. While a small percentage of asylum seekers classify as refugees, the vast majority of them are then granted what is called subsidiary protection. This effectively means that a third country national or stateless who would face a real risk of suffering serious harm if he returned to the country of origin. Serious harm is defined as death penalty or execution, torture or inhuman degrading treatment if repatriated to country of origin or internal armed conflict. Through this application, 69% of all asylum applicants in Malta in 2013 qualified as persons in need of subsidiary protection. Only 2% qualified for a refugee status. Despite the calls from a number of organizations, the church and other do-gooders, for empathy and donation, it is important to note that the most vulnerable people, including women, children, mature people and those suffering from disabilities, are forgotten, whereas those who can pay for the ferry service find the immediate protection and shelter of the EU. Isn't it hypocritical? The rule of non-refoulement. To make matters worse, the EU introduced this principle, which is widely considered as the cornerstone of international refugee law and a core human rights principle. It protects everyone from being returned or expelled to territories where their lives could be threatened, regardless of having arrived in a regular or irregular way. Several judgments by the European Court of Human Rights have confirmed the application of this principle and the right to have a claim for asylum assessed. This law fails to take note of the geographical position of the migrant. It does not mention the country of origin and the country of transit. It therefore obliges any EU member state to grant those rights to persons who crossed multiple countries in order to reach Libya, only to be ferried to Europe. Tunisia, which should also respect international law, is most of the times the closest port. Yet this is not where African migrants want to relocate to. The light at the end of the tunnel. The EU project has its advantages too. While our legislation seems dead set to encroach on our constitutional and sovereign rights, there are other provisions which have been disregarded, simply because there is no person or entity interested in seeking their enforcement. On the 13th of May 2015, the Commission published the European Agenda on Migration. The agenda proposes immediate measures to cope with the crisis in the Mediterranean and measures to be taken over the next few years to manage all aspects of immigration more effectively. As regards the medium and long term, the Commission proposes guidelines in 4 policy areas. Reducing incentives for irregular immigration. Border management, saving lives and securing external borders. Developing a stronger common asylum policy, and establishing a new policy on regular immigration, modernizing and revising the blue card system, setting fresh priorities for integration policies, and optimizing the benefits of migration policy for the individuals concerned and for countries of origin. These measures would reduce the number of crossings as well as the resulting number of inevitable deaths. Here we can see how the EU's approach towards saving lives has contributed to further deaths. In order for the agenda on migration to be effective, the European Union had to decide the number of persons that it is capable to admitting. This is something it has never managed to achieve. Despite the difficulties faced by member states, members of the European Parliament who have a duty to represent their constituents, found it easier to join a lobby and promote the agenda of that lobby. Burden sharing is one of the agendas on the list which led the EU to discuss the relocation plan and mandatory quotas. Slovakia and Hungary opposed the implementation of these policies, but the European Court of Justice ruled that all member states must adhere to relocation quotas. No member state had however come close to establishing such quotas. Germany, which has the highest number of registered NGOs, has been very hypocritical when confronted with the Dublin regulation. It was the first member state to suspend this, as we shall see.
Many say the system isn't working. Why? Because of the routes migrants take, asylum seekers first arrive in the EU in a few countries, mainly around the Mediterranean. Countries like Greece and Italy are struggling to process and accommodate all the arrivals. Germany has now become the first country to suspend the Dublin regulation, saying it doesn't work, and the EU has said that the system needs to be restructured.
Who are the NGOs? Let's take a close look at the biggest NGOs operating rescue vessels in the Mediterranean Sea. Bernard Kouchner founded the Médecins Sans Frontières. In 2010, the Jerusalem Post considered Bernard Kouchner the 15th most influential Jew in the world. Médecins Sans Frontières requires no introduction. One of the vessels it runs is the Ocean Viking, which ferried thousands of immigrants from Libya to Europe. The second contributor is George Soros, who founded Doctors Without Borders. Soros is known as the man who broke the Bank of England because of his short sale of $10 billion worth of pounds sterling, which made him a profit of $1 billion during the 1992 Black Wednesday UK currency crisis. Conspiracy theories targeting Soros, who is of Jewish descent, have often been described as anti-Semitic. He funds the Open Society. In 2017, Nigel Farage alleged collusion over Open Society funding and named 3 Maltese MEPs involved in this: Miriam Daley, Roberta Metsola, and Threes Komodini Kasha. Doctors Without Borders is under investigation over allegations it facilitates illegal immigration. Other figures hide their true identity, but their drive reveals their motives and speaks volumes about their agendas. Axel Steiner, for instance, runs Mission Lifeline. He serves as a spokesman for this NGO. In 2017 he called on Germans to marry illegal aliens so that they can stay in Europe. Questioned about this, Steiner explained that Mission Lifeline had intended to use the Holocaust Memorial Day to point out that their work ferrying migrants to Europe centered around life and emotions. So who is behind the illegal immigration agenda? In 2017, Defend Europe had launched the Sea Star vessel in order to protect the European borders. They undertook to do what Frontex had promised but failed to deliver. Since there were no NGOs to safeguard their right of entry to a safe port for the purpose of refueling and stocking on food supplies, the Maltese government had declined entry. Thanks to a number of Maltese patriots, the crew received supplies and made it to Malta on board another vessel, in total defiance of a government led by the media. Martin Soner, the person behind this mission, was later on deported from Britain over plans to speak in Hyde Park. The European Union had shown that it is ready to stand up for the rights of illegal immigrants, but that the adoption of the same laws and rights are not applicable to Europeans. For some, the Calagi plan is a conspiracy theory. For others, it is a plan in action which aims at mass immigration in order to miscegenate and destroy the European identity. The Coudenhove-Calagi European Prize is awarded every 2 years to Europeans who have excelled in promoting such plan. Angela Merkel and Herman Van Rompuy were awarded this prize. NGOs are possible behind other agendas that aim at creating a sense of empathy. In this video we shall see how a girl was used to deliver a message to Angela Merkel.
German Chancellor Angela Merkel had often spoken about fostering a welcome culture in her country. but she seemed uncertain about how to handle the approaching crisis.
Hallo, ich heiße Sie erstmal herzlich willkommen.
She appeared on a town hall TV program about immigration and encountered a young Palestinian girl whose family had not yet been accepted as refugees to Germany.
Ich weiß nicht, wie meine Zukunft aussieht, solange ich nicht wirklich weiß, dass ich hier bleiben kann.
At first, Merkel took a hard line about Germany not having room for all refugees.
Du bist ja ein unheimlich sympathischer Mensch, aber du weißt auch, in den palästinensischen Flüchtlingslagern im Libanon gibt es noch Tausende und Tausende. Und wenn wir jetzt sagen, ihr könnt alle kommen und ihr könnt alle aus Afrika kommen und ihr könnt alle kommen, das können wir auch nicht schaffen.
Then she was clearly moved when the girl started to cry.
Oh, komm.
The Chancellor was obviously torn by her conflicting instincts and responsibilities.
NGO business. While one can find the occasional missionary within non-governmental organizations, it is a fact that they operate for a profit. Tax-free profit. Let's take a look at Aditus in Malta. Dr. Neil Foltson, the founder, receives his salary from this NGO. Although the latter compiles a number of fact sheets and has been very vocal in the promotion of rights of migrants, it insists on the granting of the right to legal aid. When we speak about this right, we are touching many laws as we can see on the screen. The NGO informs the applicants of their right to appeal and that they may request to be provided with a free lawyer to assist them. But what is free except for the minds of men? A deeper look at the composition of this NGO reveals a list of legal interns and human rights specialists. They don't work for free, which is why the European Union spends millions to fund these non-governmental organizations. Euro 105.8 million were transferred to the Maltese government between 2015 and 2019 for asylum, migration and integration. Do you still believe that NGOs are there to defend the rights of migrants? Or are they using that right to earn their buck? The European Court of Human Rights. International law is not about rights and wrongs. It is about interests. In the past, such interests used to be state interests, yet given the contribution and active participation of huge conglomerates and wealthy persons, state interests have devolved into the specific interest of those who control the representatives of the state. Lobbying has made this possible. It is no surprise that the European Court of Human Rights interprets the letter of the law with no regard to the repercussions of its decisions. If state elections can be rigged through lobbying and manipulation of public opinion, is it impossible for those who run the show to manipulate court decisions? In 2018, the European Court of Human Rights ruled in favor of a mafioso since he claimed about inadequate medical care in prison despite the deterioration of his health. Italian politicians were shocked to hear about the ruling. Luigi Di Maio had stated that the court didn't know what it was talking about and that the mafia had to be eradicated rather than protected. Matteo Salvini highlighted the uselessness of the European Court. This case is an example of how individual human rights can be allowed to tramp on the collective rights of a nation. In 2019, the socialist Italian government accused Salvini of kidnapping for refusing to allow 177 migrants from disembarking in Italy. The Italian court ruled that Salvini shall be tried. In Malta, a fragment of the so-called nationalist party by the name of Repubblica Malta, filed criminal complaints against the armed forces of Malta and the Prime Minister of Malta for the alleged intentional sabotage of a rubber dinghy carrying asylum seekers. This goes to show the amount of power which NGOs have garnered through the extension and bias of human rights principles and through the backing of the European Court of Human Rights. States have the obligation to screen NGO operations and to stop human trafficking and smuggling operations. Character assassination. Instead of tackling illegal immigration, the European Union introduced further hate laws and anti-racism laws in order to muzzle those who express their disapproval. Way back in 2005, Norman Lowell was the first Maltese politician to state that we should stop them at 14 miles.
The enemy is not only at the gates, the enemy is manning the gates.
The local media was quick to launch multiple character assassinations, given that he accused the president of Malta of being a good gardener but a lousy president and for creating an anti-migrant sentiment. Norman Lowell had insisted that the armed forces shall fire warning shots when approaching vessels, disregard instructions and subsequently shot at. The media twisted the meaning in order to make it sound like a shoot-to-kill promotion. Meanwhile, the Popular Party AfD, notwithstanding the limitations of free speech in Germany, was promoting more drastic but legal views about the safeguard of borders.
Frauke Petri insisted that German border guards should be allowed to use their weapons to stop migrants from illegally crossing into the country. When you talk about German border guards using weapons against refugees, are you trying to send them some kind of message? Don't come here, you may be shot? What was the purpose of that?
If you read the interview that I gave, I was asked about possibilities to secure the German border, and I cited a German law that, as ultima ratio, also allows the use of weapons. Nothing more I did, and media created a scandal from it. If it's not possible in a democratic society to cite the laws that exist, then I think we do have a problem.
No, Norman Lowell was never found guilty of having made fun of the President of Malta, nor of his anti-migration speeches. This is what most of the Maltese believe, given the wrong information by the media. He was found guilty by Judge Lawrence Quintano for an article he had written years before and in which he had claimed that Jews were parasites and behind the world's problems. The judge had cited the European Court of Human Rights in Pavel Ivanov v. Russia. Pavel Ivanov wrote and published a series of articles portraying Jews as plotters against the Russian people, and the tenor of his remarks was markedly anti-Semitic. He was convicted of incitement to ethnic, racial and religious hatred. The court considered that Mr. Ivanov was complaining in substance of a violation of his right to freedom of expression under Article 10. It took the view that the applicant, who had sought in his publications to incite hatred towards the Jewish people and advocated violence against a particular group, could not claim their protection of Article 10. The court declared the application inadmissible. On the basis of this judgment, Quintano ruled that their author can submit that his article had a global aspect and not a local one. Yet the construct of words in this article does not exclude the place where the people may be found. We expel them from Malta since they are not Europid. The Jewish community in Malta must feel threatened by the use of words such as final solution, since this is a threat that applies to all Jews wherever they may be. Hence what seems to be global has a local application too. Through this method, courts do not deliver justice but follow the letter of the quoted law, which conflicts with other laws such as the freedom of thought, opinion, expression and association. At this point they refer to the European Courts of Justice and find a plethora of different conclusions, some of which tally with the conclusion they might have in mind. One might question what this has got to do with immigration. The silencing of people is in fact the most dangerous and criminal aspect of the adopted agenda. Media channels in Malta have in fact decided to disable the comments sections whenever the report related to the immigration topic. While the European Union punishes those whose anti-immigration campaigns becoming popular, those who seem to pertain to the same group are free to voice their wicked opinion.
They see them as a threat to Israel's internal security. And if a cash incentive of $3,500 doesn't work, then they'll deport them. Steps Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says are legal and proportionate and necessary for maintaining the Jewish and democratic character of the state.
Here is Barbara Lerner Spector for you.
I think there's a resurgence of anti-Semitism because at this point in time, Europe has not yet learned how to be multicultural. And I think we're going to be part of the throes of that transformation, which must take place. Europe is not going to be the monolithic societies that they once were in the last century. Jews are going to be at the center of that. It's a huge transformation for Europe to make. They are now going into a multicultural mode, and Jews will be resented because of our leading role. But without that leading role and without that transformation, Europe will not survive.
By now you should be wondering whether illegal immigration is a problem or an agenda. Thanks for watching.